Ready for the interview, and if you get a cue live on the laptop, watch what I'm gonna do. Welcome to the show, let them know we got a point of view. Hey, yo, let's have a combo. Say what you feel, be real, that's the motto. Real talk pronto, Dr. D, PhD, hit an intro. Hold up, wait, gotta be social. Network global, a home for the local. Gotta be social. Network global, a home for the local.
We're here on a very sweaty episode.
That's right.
Very sweaty, heat of the night stuff.
Yeah.
I used to watch that show too, man.
I love that.
Everybody was sweating their asses off on that show, man.
I love it when a movie portrays heat like that. They actually allow the actors to just be sweaty and gross. And
kind of like now. Yeah.
Yeah. Sweaty and gross. That's kind of my life right now.
It's kind of your life, Simon.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Wow. All right. Well, listen, I've been steeped. I've watched so much TV. It's unbelievable.
Really?
Last month. Honestly, it's been
what's going on in your life that you're watching so much TV?
The crazy thing is I'm busier than I've ever been, but I've decided I want to watch more TV than I've ever watched in a long time.
That's really funny. So is that like an unwinding kind of thing? I know a lot of people who feel really busy. That's a way they kind of unwind at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Is that how you're feeling about it?
I think, it's partially that too. And I think there's just this kind of confluence of things that are coming together. And it's one I've been, like you, I consider yourself a big, historian or educator of different things. Like you like to learn about the history of things and take deep dives. I'm inspired by that. I've never seen myself as someone like that. But I thought, you know what? I'm inspired by this. So I've been doing
You
very
think of
deep
yourself
dives.
more of an ignoramus.
Yes, someone who's just, just a bloviating guy, just a guy who just says a bunch of stuff, like a lot like people.
You have opinions, but you have nothing to back those opinions up with. Yeah.
I was like, man, I should probably know more about a lot of different things. So I've taken very deep dives into World War II and
interesting, yeah.
conquistadors. So I've watched a lot of documentaries, reading about it, and it's mind-blowing about what you learn about the history of humans, which is honestly not very good, actually.
No, it's really kind of sad, isn't it?
It's sad.
The way that we... So I expressed this to Shannon maybe a year ago or something like that. And I think it really had an effect on her because even when we were in New Orleans and we were going to museums, she was commenting back on it. And the thing was, I was saying, it's so tiresome that history is told through war. I find that so tiresome and aggravating.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that is... the best record keeping we have was like military record keeping for the most part, so laws and governments and things like that, they kept good records. So we have the best history that we normally can do is via warfare, which is really an unfortunate way to tell history. But it is what we have. So
yeah, it's like war and conflict or upheaval. It's just really just all of this colonization, conquering. And I think the Nazi Hitler one was disgusting. I mean, it was a hard watch on Netflix. It was 6 episodes. It was incredible. But they filmed everything, the Nazis, everything. And the video of the people in concentration camps is just very difficult to watch, extremely difficult.
Yeah. Well, when you think you're on the right side of history and you think you're going to come out victorious, then you're not worried about hiding anything. So you're celebrating what you do. And I think for the most part, that's how, anybody who was a Nazi supporter felt. And it's always important to recognize that probably only about a third of Germany actually actively supported the Nazi party. Nazis were a political party, just like Republicans and Democrats, but they got too much power. And that's why we have those, conversations. We might compare somebody like Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler. And it's not because we think he's starting concentration camps and things like that, but we're talking about how does a political party grasp that much power, even when they're not in the majority.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's just actually pretty disgusting, and it was kind of similar to me when on Hulu they had the Conquistadors. It's another 5-6 part series. I mean, super deep dive, and they were saying how like in Europe had like 800 years of religious violence. I was like, whoa, back it up, 800 years. What's going? I mean, of religious
Yeah.
violence, and then this narrative that you people push on you in high school and stuff of Cortez and Columbus, and you realize these guys are just such assholes. They're such
Oh, they're
dirtbags,
some
just
of the worst
some
people
of
in
the
all of
worst
history.
people.
Yeah.
Just conquering the Mayas, the Aztecs, the Incas, Francisco Pizarro, all these guys, like, and then on their back end was like, well, let's convert these people too. They're
Yeah.
savages. Disgusting, man.
Yeah. They really thought that what's crazy about that is to claim that you have the moral upper hand when you are the one destroying an entire civilization.
Right. Right.
You know, and so the audacity to say, "Oh, because I wear a cross around my neck symbolizing my faith in Jesus, that gives me the moral upper hand when I am committing genocide."
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
it's
wild, right?
but we get that teaching from reading the Hebrew Bible. I
Yeah.
mean, and then Revelations. We
Right.
have a short break from talking about genocide. you know,
How about a short break from it?
yeah.
A little intermission.
Jesus, historical Jesus never talks about,
Yeah.
God, committing genocide. But then you have the Jesus in Revelations who's
Right.
reveling in destroying all of his quote unquote enemies.
Yeah.
Um, Now, if you believe in a heavenly Father as your God, and you put yourself like you and I as fathers, would we ever speak of any of our children as our enemies that need to be subdued and destroyed? I have a hard time with that one.
I have a hard time with that too, man. And actually, I thought about you a lot yesterday too, because it's the last thing I'll say about all the things I've been watching.
Mhm.
But I watched the documentary The Mission on Hulu. And
Oh,
it's about, I don't know if you remember this guy, John Chow, who went to North Sentinelese Island, this people who basically were undiscovered people,
mhm.
tribes people, and he tried to go and spread the word of Jesus, of God to these, and he got killed. He tried to go up to the
Yeah.
island, which was illegal because they have a 3-mile zone. You can't go there. And, they basically shot him with a spear. They killed him. And had you heard of this story years ago?
Yeah, I vaguely know the story, but I don't
Yeah.
I don't know the details.
Right. So it's this young guy who was, fundamentalist, evangelical Christian, and he basically had this vision, this dream that in order for Jesus to return, that you need to, the gospel needs to be spread to every single nation on
Yeah.
earth. And this was in his mind, this was the last frontier. These
Hmm.
people were isolated from all of society, true hunter gatherers. Like, if I do this, this is going to be the culmination.
So he doesn't care about North Korea, China, any of
No,
those
no,
places
none
where
of
they
that.
can't
No,
talk about
right,
Jesus at all. Okay. So
completely.
none of that matters. All
Yeah,
right.
it was all like this really, and I thought you would find this interesting. They juxtaposed this between his story and missionary work, the history of missionary work,
Hmm.
which I thought was really interesting how they kind of just talked about it, you know,
Yeah.
and the calling that someone may get. And sometimes there's a line between calling and madness, faith and madness. And maybe you're not actually called. Maybe something else is happening. It was all that type of stuff,
Yeah.
basically. I actually think you would really enjoy it based off of what I know you like about learning about these types of things.
Yeah. No, I think I
It's
would
just,
be.
yeah, it's just the whole aspect of like he really thought this was it. This is it.
Yeah.
Like, I must, and just made the stupidest mistake. He rolled up into that island with a Bible, put it up in the air, and these people have no clue what he's talking about. I
Yeah.
mean, that could have been interpreted as anything, anything.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And and there's a language barrier, there's all kinds of things. I don't know if he thought he was speaking in tongues and that, the Holy
Yeah,
Spirit would just translate for him or something,
yeah,
um but yeah, those are And I grew up in the Mormon church, obviously. So I grew up in a missionary church. I
Right.
mean, nobody does missionary work like the Mormons do.
Yeah.
There's not even a competition. There's no competition for Mormon missionary work in the world of any
Right.
religion. And I served a 2-year mission in Brazil. My main kind of like area was the northern part of the state of Rio de Janeiro, and then the state above it, which is Espírito Santo. And of course, we're talking about a heavily Catholic, uh, country, and so everybody there already believes in Jesus. Most of them.
Right. Right.
So the point of a Mormon mission is to say, hey, wrong Jesus. you know, I mean, um, and this is preached because the Mormon Church and currently the Mormon Church has a real hard time with the term Mormon, which is really interesting.
Hmm.
Um, because Mormon is a nickname. It has nothing to do with the actual name of the church. The actual name of the church is the Church of Jesus Christ
Right.
of Latter-day Saints. Um, and so anyway, it's just really interesting that as leadership changes in the church, so do attitudes about being called Mormon change. So the current leader of the church, his name is Nelson, President Nelson. He has always been adamant about not referencing ourselves as Mormons
Hmm.
because that's not what we're called. Well, previous presidents before him, people like Gordon B. Hinckley and Monson, well, they had no problem with it. They actually like that was a real disagreement between them. And in fact, with President Monson, the church spent millions of dollars on an ad campaign that was basically the ad campaign was I'm a Mormon. And it was supposed to show the diversity of the church and just kind of show everybody, hey, it's kind of like those celebrity magazines. We're just like you, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
um, and so, they had like the big screens on in Times Square in New
Yeah.
York. You could see big commercials of "I'm a Mormon" on these things. And then President Nelson comes along. He says, "Hey, if he basically, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but the essence of what he says is that if we call ourselves Mormons, Satan wins." And I was
Oh,
like, "Whoa."
wow.
Because the
Aggressive.
previous and you have to understand that the president of the church the members of the church revere them as a prophet, not unlike Moses or Isaiah or any other
Right.
major prophet. They are revered as such. So when one prophet completely goes against another prophet, that's a big deal, but I don't think a lot of members of the church really kind of like grasp the consequence of that.
Yeah.
um but it's very, very interesting. But so much of that is wrapped up in, I mean, how you portray yourself to the world. That's your missionary work,
Right.
right? So so even the top leadership of the church disagrees on how we should present ourselves to the world in order to become good missionaries,
Right.
because the attitude is for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that this is the one true church of God. Like none of the other churches are accurate,
Yeah.
you know. So and this is the one true church led by a true prophet of God. And it's preached from the pulpit all the time that in order to come to Jesus, you have to come to him through his one true church. So that is the emphasis of this, the importance of this missionary work. That if you're a Catholic who's come to Jesus, you haven't really come to Jesus. If you're a Baptist who's come to Jesus, you haven't really come to
Yeah.
Jesus until you've come to Jesus through his one true church.
I see.
And it is just a fascinating you could just it's a study in dogmatism,
Yes.
you know
Yes.
and and that kind of dogmatism for me is very anti-Jesus.
Yeah.
But my reading of Jesus in the New Testament, uh he's not a dogmatic preacher, so to
Right.
speak. He is what's the spirit of the
Yeah.
law? What is the law trying to point you toward? And
Yeah.
that is where we get love one another, be a good
Sure.
neighbor, all these kinds of things. So it's just interesting to me, any church, including the church that I grew up in, who takes that dogmatism so seriously,
Yeah.
to say that no matter how much you think you've come to Jesus in your heart, you haven't really come to Jesus until, so on and so forth.
Yeah. That's fascinating. That is really fascinating. And I think like in this with John Chow and his whole mission, it's the basis, the overwhelming basis is these people don't know anything. They have no uh they're not able to hear the word of Jesus or whatever. So they're gonna go to hell. And we must save them because
Yeah.
if we don't preach to them, then they will go to hell. That was their whole thing, was we have to do this or else they're
Yep.
in eternal damnation.
That's that dogmatism,
That's the
because you
dogmatism.
you
Yeah.
you you believe that there has to be certain steps fulfilled
Right.
in order for a person to escape the wrath of God,
Yeah.
which is to send them to hell, which I think is so counterintuitive,
Right.
because if God is love, as Paul states,
Mm.
then why are we having to spend our time escaping his wrath? You know what I mean? Isn't
Yeah, of
that kind of an
course.
odd way to, like, but when people become really dogmatic, and especially when they become dogmatic and they're trying to use the Bible as solo scriptura, which
Yeah.
is like, this is the one word
Right.
of God and it's infallible, but it contradicts the things that you're saying.
Yes.
That's the real problem.
That's the problem. Yeah.
That if you actually study the Bible all the way through, your dogma doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
Like, it really falls apart
Yeah.
in an instant.
It's
And
true.
so and that's what I always try to get people to just kind of recognize. And the point isn't I'm right, you're wrong. It's that we're all wrong.
Yeah.
And I've wrote about this extensively. I have almost an entire chapter kind of dedicated to this idea in this book I've been working on. And the chapter is called God is All in Your Imagination.
Mm.
And the point of the chapter is just to say, throughout history and in every different culture and in every different denomination of Christianity or other religions, people see God differently.
Right.
Like, the religion of ancient Israel would be completely foreign to any Christian today,
Yeah.
because they imagined God so differently than we do. So, and that should tell us, and then the way a Baptist imagines God isn't the way a Mormon imagines God. In fact, a Baptist would tell you a Mormon isn't Christian,
Right. That's
even
true.
though even though it's the Church of Jesus Christ, you know.
This is crazy.
But because Mormons don't accept things such as the Nicene Creed,
Right.
Mormons chuck that in the trash.
Yeah.
They don't accept that at all. And one of the reasons for that is that it has no scriptural basis.
Yeah.
And then you have a Baptist who believes in sola scriptura, but they still accept the Nicene Creed, and they say a Mormon isn't Christian because they haven't accepted the creed, but the creed has no scriptural basis.
Right.
And so anyway, it's so messy.
It is
and
messy.
and and
Yeah.
and everybody should just be going around, like, the real missionary work that should be being done is everybody going around saying, hey, I'm wrong and so are you.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, that's pretty beautiful. And I think I listened to this podcast. Simon, you inspire me a lot. Seriously, you have such knowledge, and you do the work. And I'm like, Simon's doing the work. I need to do the work too, man. I need to be a little better at this. And I
I
love this
appreciate it.
podcast. Yeah, for sure. The Bible for Normal People. It's actually
That
really
sounds
good.
great.
It's
It
great,
sounds
right?
really
It's
great.
good. And it's like a deep, educated dive into the Bible. And the first episode I listened to was like, who wrote John? And
How many people wrote
right.
John?
And
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it was interesting that the religious scholars came to this pretty much conclusion. They're still working on it, that that obviously John was not written by John, and that it was, and a lot of writers at the time did this thing. I'm messing up the term, but pseudepigraphal, something like that.
Pseudepigrapha.
Pseudepigraphal, yeah.
Yeah.
They imitated the writers of the time and would almost
It's
like
a polite way
ghostwriting.
to say forgery.
Yeah, right. It's exactly
Yeah, that's the polite way of saying
right.
it. But
And
yes, forgery.
I wasn't aware that this was a pretty common practice of the time. But you will never hear that in a church. You'll never
No,
hear that
no,
ever. And I was
no,
like,
no, no.
we need to have more courage about these types of things to like, bring forth that these are different authors, maybe not even close to what you think it is.
Yeah,
And I just like stuff like that. I'm like,
yeah. I mean, there's so many proofs against any of these guys being able to have written
yeah.
what they wrote. For one thing, they were probably all illiterate.
Mm.
I mean, so and they could have dictated to somebody who was literate, and
Right.
I'm not saying that that's an impossibility, but they were also all written in fairly high literate Greek.
Right.
And take something like Jesus's very famous Beatitudes.
Yeah.
Well, the way those are written, they have poetic devices about them that only work in Greek. So if somebody was translating from Aramaic, which is probably what the disciples of Jesus and Jesus himself spoke,
Yeah.
then they were taking a lot of poetic liberty to make them work in the Greek in a poetic way, the way that they do, or they were just making it all up.
Yeah,
And they just
right.
wrote it in
Right.
Greek,
Right.
and that so but there aren't many other really valid options for something like that.
Yeah.
But and that's when we have to be able to say, well, Jesus probably literally didn't say that.
Yeah.
It's probably capturing the essence of what he's saying, but in order for him to have literally said taught the Beatitudes the way that they're copied down in the Gospels, he would have had to have been speaking them in Greek.
Right.
So why would Jesus be speaking in Greek, and why would he be teaching an audience in Galilee
Yeah.
in Greek?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it
It doesn't
makes
make
zero
no
sense
sense.
whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have to just be able to look at that and be able to accept these are artistic renderings of what Jesus may have said. But now
Right.
that we know that they're artistic renderings, we also have to put into question, did he actually even say it?
Right. 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 Well, that
know?
makes people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because it's a linchpin of their belief system, whatever. So I never look at it that way. I don't know. I just don't have that feeling about it. Like, oh, this
Yeah.
rides on everything. I just think, well, it's just a lot of nuance, and life is
So
full of tremendous nuance and mystery.
so my kids have been going to different like summer camps and stuff like that,
Mhm.
and my two youngest, and they are 14 and 15. So one or two of these summer camps, a couple of these summer camps are sponsored by the Mormon Church.
Yeah.
So they're going there and they're having a good time, but they're also getting, they're going listening to some talks and things like that. And so after one of them, my daughter Rainbow, who's 15, she comes home and she wants to talk to me about the Book of Mormon because, they talk a lot about the Book of Mormon and the
Sure.
Mormon
Yeah.
Church, as you might expect.
Yeah.
And to set this up, people have to realize how important the Book of Mormon is to Mormons, and that the subtitle of the Book of Mormon is Another Testament of Jesus Christ. So it's meant to be a complementary volume to the New Testament and what is misnamed the Old Testament,
Right.
because the idea of the Old Testament being called the Old Testament is that it's testifying of Jesus Christ. Unfortunately, Jesus is never mentioned
Oh.
in the quote unquote Old Testament.
Yeah.
So we really need to be calling it the Hebrew Bible because that's really what
That's
it is.
correct.
And the New
Yeah.
Testament should be called the Christian Bible because that's
Right.
what that is. And then the Book of Mormon is another Bible, or in other words, another library,
Mhm.
because it is very much presented very much like the Bible, as there's a bunch of different authors throughout different eras of time who are talking about their and the people's experience with God. So that is the essence of the Book of Mormon. The other important thing about the Book of Mormon that people who aren't Mormon need to understand is that, and it says this in the preface of the Book of Mormon, that the Book of Mormon to Mormons, this is their attitude toward it, is the most correct book on the planet. It's more correct than the Bible, because Joseph Smith's attitude, what he believed, is that the Bible had been mistranslated over time, and that people had taken from the Bible and added to the Bible in ways that were making it not always correct. With all the archaeological discoveries that we've made actually in the last 150 years or so, we can definitively say that Joseph Smith was incorrect in this assumption, because the Bible that we have is remarkably accurate to the oldest texts that we've been able to find. It's remarkable. And there's really no evidence other than some scribal errors.
Correct. Yeah.
That it's been added to, changed, so on and so forth. So, but anyway, that was the attitude of Joseph Smith. So they're trying to say that the Book of Mormon, and the point of saying that is to say that the Book of Mormon, if you read it and accompanying with the Bible, that it will bring you closer to Christ, the real Christ, right? The whole idea of the missionary work, not the fake Christ.
It's not the real Slim Shady, okay?
Yeah, exactly. But the real one.
Please stand up.
Yeah. So, and one of the things that Mormons like to say, Mormon apologists like to talk about, is that Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon only once. It was only translated one time into English. Now, of course, it's been translated to tons of languages now, but those translations have been done from the English to those other languages, because the gold plates that Joseph Smith claimed to have translated them from, well, he also said that an angel took them back to heaven and that they're no longer on the earth. So there's no, but anyway, but Mormon apologists like to say that's why it's the most correct book, because it was only translated one time into the English, and it was done so by the inspiration of God, by a prophet. So it has to be correct.
Right.
So Rainbow comes home and she's asking me about this. She's like, well, they were talking about it, Dad, like we have proof that it's like definitive. And I told her, it's like, well, that's actually completely incorrect. We have no proof, because we have no plates. We have no gold plates.
Right,
We have
that's
no,
right.
yeah. With the Bible, we have all these ancient, right? So we can compare. And that's how we know oftentimes, like, oh, well, such and such thing was added later.
That's correct.
To maybe like Luke or whatever, because we have these ancient manuscripts, and a lot of them are missing certain sections or certain passages. So anyway, so we're having this very interesting conversation, and what we come to is I start talking to her. I say, hey, honey, we need to be able to talk about different kinds of truth, because there is a literal truth, right?
Yeah.
And that's what most Christians, especially the sola scriptura Christians, who want to say that the Bible is the literal, unerring word of God, that it's every single word of it is literally true.
Right. Yeah.
And so I used Plato as an example.
Interesting.
And I said, when I read the works of Plato and all these dialogues of Socrates that he writes down, I don't care if they're true. I don't care if they're literally true. I don't care if they're historically accurate. And in fact, Plato drops many, many hints that they're not. And he does so very playfully.
Right.
And but I tell her what's important is the truth within the fiction. And that is what we can call metaphorical truth, or poetic truth, or whatever you want to call it. So when we read these scriptures, the Bible, the Book of Mormon, what have you, instead of looking for literal truth, They say, what's what Jesus was getting at,
That's correct.
you
That's
know?
right. Yeah. The
Like
spirit of it. Yeah.
what's the real truth?
Right.
Give you this like a quick example for our audience. You know, at one point, Jesus and his disciples are found picking grain for food on the Sabbath, strictly forbidden
Mhm.
in the law of Moses. So he's called out for it, and Jesus says, "Fear not to do good on the Sabbath." And he
Yeah.
says, "The Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath." This is a really interesting thing for Jesus to say, because if you start applying that to the rest of the laws, and you start applying that philosophically to any law, the law is made for our benefit, but we were not created for the law. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
It does. Yeah.
So, our existence, the purpose of our existence is not to obey the law. The law is just there to help us on our way. But once we understand the spirit of the law the way Jesus did, and it's kind of like learning any other kind of art form. You learn to color by the numbers at first. You
Right.
learn your primary colors at first. You know, you do all this kind of stuff. But then at a certain point, you start doing your own thing.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what Jesus starts doing. He's like, I'm
True.
doing my own thing now. And my own thing is going to be contrary to the law sometimes, a literal reading of the law. But my own thing is always going to be observing the spirit of the law,
That's
which is
right.
to do good to others and to ourselves.
Yeah. Although, it's funny, religious leaders are always trying to catch Jesus, like in these gotcha moments. It was like, I think it
Yeah.
was one story. He's at dinner with religious leaders, and they bring in this guy who's swollen and has these issues, and they're thinking, oh, is he gonna heal this person on the Sabbath? And he does it, and it's kind of, and he's like, if someone is in need of help, basically, I'm paraphrasing, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter if it's the Sabbath or not, you're gonna help the person.
Yeah.
But it's
That's
always the
actually, I think, the
religious,
story where he says, "Fear not to do good on the Sabbath." I think
right?
that's the
Yeah,
actual story where he says that.
yeah, and that's just like, it's like, again, the spirit of it's like someone needs help. Like, you're
Yeah.
being very legalistic, and also trying. They were threatened by him completely. It was like, man, this guy's a rebel. Like, like,
Yeah.
it's like this very human feeling of being threatened, and my way is the way, and who are you, type of thing. It's like,
Well, and it's interesting that we call the law of Moses, or any law, we call it God's law,
yeah,
right? This is the law of God. But God disobeys these laws all the time.
yeah.
He says, "Thou shalt not murder," but I mean, come
I
on.
mean, come on, yeah, exactly.
I mean, you know,
Right.
um, you know, this is going to sound really, this is going to offend a lot of people, you know, but God says not to commit adultery. Well, how did Mary get pregnant? I mean, I'm just saying, you call it a
Tom, you always take it
miracle.
real far, man.
Well, I think we have to wrestle with these things, because no
Right.
matter how you imagine how that pregnancy went, whether you
Sure.
imagine that, like God came down like Zeus and actually
Right.
had sex with
Zeus.
her.
Yeah.
Well, they say she's a virgin, so I guess he didn't actually have sex with her
Yeah.
physically, but she got pregnant somehow.
Yeah. And it wasn't by the dude. Like,
Yeah. And it wasn't voluntary. She
right.
finds out after she's pregnant that
Right.
she's been,
Yeah.
impregnated.
Yeah.
So by that definition, she was raped.
Yeah. It's like, you just go with there, man.
I'm
Remember, it's
I'm
like the
just
Adam
saying,
story, and it's like he didn't
you
want her.
know.
It's like he was
Yeah.
gay. I think it's like
You know, but I think we have to wrestle with these things. We
yeah.
have to, because if you're going to say, "Oh, God did a miracle," but it wasn't a miracle with the person's consent.
Right.
They'll probably argue God doesn't have to ask for our consent. Well,
Sure.
doesn't that
Right.
take away our ability, our free agency, if
Right.
God's doing things without our consent?
Yeah.
So on and so forth. It just
Sure.
becomes more and more problematic the more you break it down, the more you get into the finer details of it. And so we have to accept that, God's law is really bendable and
Yeah,
breakable.
fluid. Are you saying it's fluid? I'm like,
It's fluid.
it's
It's
fluid.
fluid. Yeah.
It's on a spectrum.
It's trans.
I mean, we're all on the spectrum on some. I mean, it's just,
Yeah, we are. We are.
just that's
And
my whole thing is nuance. Is like there's just so much nuance, and I don't know. Don't lay it all on the line. It's just like it's a nuanced conversation. There's things you're gonna know, not know. That's why studying is great. Ask questions, learn
yeah.
more. It's not like this is like, yeah, if it does destroy your thing, it does. Okay, maybe that's your personal decision. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But be open to the crevices and cracks and the different things. Those are important things to wrestle with.
If you're in a church or a religion, and I'm speaking from personal experience
Mhm.
here, but if you belong to a church who tells you not to read or explore other things,
Yeah.
then there's a couple of things happening there. One, they have no confidence in their own teaching. Two, it's basically a cult.
Yeah.
A cult
Totally. I've said this to a lot of
is
people. I said
yeah,
that's a cult, basically.
yeah,
Like
exactly.
isolating
You
the
know,
information that's coming into you, it's like
yes, filtering information,
filter.
only allowing you access to certain information and telling you to ignore all other information.
Correct.
If you want to say the other information is incorrect, then at least prove it. At least,
Yeah.
say and at least allow people to see for themselves, because so and that's what I always do in these types of conversations. I say, anything I say, either I will clarify that it's my opinion and I have and I don't have any evidence, it's just something I made up. Or I will say, and this is 99% of the time, I say, this is where you can read about it.
Right.
And oftentimes, most more than not, I'm telling people, it's in your own Bible.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going way out there, it's like,
Right.
no, it's just in the Bible. And
It's
if
in
you
there.
read
Yeah.
it, you'll find it,
Yeah.
and if you also, context is really important.
Of
So you might
course.
read a verse, and I've grown up doing this, assuming I knew the meanings of, you know, such and such chapter and verse. Well, it turns out that I was reading those chapters and verses completely out of context, historical context, and even just the context presented within the Bible itself.
Yeah.
And so I had them completely wrong. And that's where Christians think that, prophets like Isaiah are talking about Jesus, because they're reading Isaiah completely out of context and they're not seeing what he's actually talking about. And then when I present that to people and they're like, "Oh, well," and they see that I'm right,
Yeah.
because we're just reading Isaiah together, so, and they see, "Oh, that's clearly what Isaiah is actually saying." Then they say, "Well, couldn't there be a double meaning to it?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, but why?
Yeah.
Why?
Why
Why
have
would
two
God
meanings?
be
Yeah.
so confusing and like tricky like that?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't God have his prophets just say what they mean? So if Isaiah wants to talk about Jesus, why doesn't he just talk about Jesus?
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
for me, that would make it really clear that
Right.
Isaiah would say, "Hey, there's going to be a guy named Jesus,
Yeah.
and this is what's going to happen." Well, he doesn't do that.
Right.
Instead, he writes a lot of poetry.
Yeah.
And that poetry is always about what's happening at the time.
Right.
And if you want to imply a double meaning in that, you have to tell me why. You have to tell
Yeah.
me why Isaiah would do that. Why
Right.
God would want Isaiah to do that. And so
Yeah.
far, nobody's had a good answer for that.
Right.
you know?
Yeah. Well, and most people, they're just not taught this level of depth and nuance and context. And, honestly, most people are just scripture rippers, I like to call them. They just rip a scripture and then they make up a bunch of stuff that this applies to this. It's like, well, what about the historical context of this scripture, the time? Let's
Yeah.
put this together. But I understand they're not taught that either. It's
No.
just it's very much like this is what happened, this is what it is. And, don't you ever disagree with it. And then the cult starts at that
Yeah.
point. Like,
So, and I'm just picking on Christianity because that's our background.
sure, of
But
course.
you could apply this to a lot of other religions.
Agreed. Yeah.
But what I'm going to say is that Christians are taught to feel, not to think.
Yeah.
And I think that, I feel and think that that's a really big problem.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think that's a huge problem. The last
Yeah.
thing I'm going to trust is how I feel, because I can feel a lot of different things that are completely wrong.
Yeah.
I might get really angry for somebody and then find out later whatever it was that happened it wasn't their fault at all.
Yeah.
But that feeling I had blamed them for whatever it was. So that feeling was completely wrong.
Yeah.
Completely wrong. So why would I trust my feeling about other things without any evidence to back the feeling up?
Interesting, right?
Yeah.
I know. It's
But
like
that's where thought comes in.
it is where the thought comes in. I think you're just taught not to think about it at all. And then you go through this whole, honestly, indoctrination about things. It's
Yeah.
much like a lot of, especially fundamentalism, is you're put in a cocoon. I wasn't in that. That was not my pathway. It was much more, very much, very loose. It was like, hey, here or not, it's okay. Come today or not. It was not like a very strict thing. I wasn't going to like Christian
Yeah.
middle school, high school. But there's lots of people who like their pathway was like complete shut off from other aspects. It was like only were going to these types of schools, this type of university. They were all very Christian. But
Hmm.
then like when you actually live in the world and you get different ideas, it's like, wait a minute, I've been sheltered. And
Yeah.
wait, people think differently. These people are not evil the way it was just whole weird thing of like, we need to proselytize to these people, but also they're a threat to us too at the same time.
It's us against the world,
Yeah.
us
Like they
against
could turn
them.
me into a bad person, but I need to talk to them too.
Hmm.
This is like this crazy juxtaposition.
So I asked a question of somebody recently, and of course they had no answer for it. I said, listen, I want you to take the serpent in the Garden of Eden completely out of the equation here, because never in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, is the serpent equated with Satan. So we're gonna take that one out. Now I want you to reference me one single time in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, where Satan deceives anybody, where it's actually stated that there is a Satan and that Satan deceives other people
Right.
and takes them away from God. It's not there.
Yeah.
It's not, there's not a single
Yeah.
moment in time where Satan works to deceive anybody. And if you really want to, say that the serpent in the Garden of Eden was Satan, then we really run into some problems there too, because turns out he wasn't being very deceptive. He was telling the truth. And if you want to say that he was, manipulating the truth or whatever, we can have that conversation. But the serpent actually doesn't tell any lies.
Yeah.
And and so anyway, but I just find that so interesting, because so much of the fear mongering that happens in Christianity today, and it started with Paul, really, where he was saying that Satan and his
Yeah.
minions will deceive you,
Right.
and Satan can even appear as an angel of light because he's so deceptive in that way. And it's like, well, there's no scriptural evidence for this
Right.
whatsoever. There's just none. Paul's just making shit up,
Yeah.
you know. And I find that Paul said that when Paul's only evidence that Jesus is his savior is that, he had this spiritual experience.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, couldn't that have been Satan disguised as an angel of light? I'm just saying, Paul,
I know.
how do
Yeah.
you know How do you know anything?
Yeah.
If Satan can do that, and if God allows that, then how can anybody know anything?
Yeah.
How can you trust your feeling? It might be Satan appearing as an angel of light.
Yeah. Very similar, like Paul's feelings about premarital sex and sexuality. Very messy,
Yeah.
actually. Like strange, like really strange. Like,
Well, and Paul, we all always have to put Paul in the context of he really thought Jesus was coming back,
right.
next
Yeah.
day, next week, next
Yeah.
month. He really thought it was imminent. And so a lot of what he's teaching is really, it's like, you know, so, especially, when it comes to things like marriage, he's telling guys, you don't really need to get married.
That's right.
Well, it's because Jesus is coming tomorrow. So what's the point?
What's the point?
You know what I'm saying?
Exactly
You
right.
know?
That's what he said, man.
So we always have to put those things into context, cultural context, Paul's personal biases.
Personal bias, his own shame related
Yeah.
to these topics.
And we have to remember that we only have a real small selection of what Paul potentially wrote. He
Right.
references other letters that he wrote that we don't have within the letters that we do have.
Right.
In First Corinthians, he mentions a letter that he wrote to the Corinthians previously. So First Corinthians isn't even First Corinthians. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
Yeah. Trump
It's
knows that
actually,
too.
yeah. Corinthians 2,
Corinthians
2.
2.
Yep.
Like, this guy's a massive
Yeah.
idiot. What a twat. Like, they hold this Bible upside down. Like,
Yeah.
massive twat.
Yeah. But so those are the important things, and those are when, and I always like to say this as well, just like, the more dogmatic a religion becomes, the more easily falsifiable it becomes.
That's true. Yeah.
I mean, it is so easy to prove any Christian church wrong. It's the easiest thing on earth. Seriously. And that was
Um,
part of that conversation I was having with my daughter, Rainbow,
yeah.
when she was saying that, the people who are giving these talks at this camp, they were talking about it like we can just prove it. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, the opposite's true.
Right.
If anything's true, it's that we can easily prove the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is wrong.
Yeah.
That's what we can prove. But that's where faith comes in.
It's true.
That's where your ability to say something might not be historically true, but maybe there's a different kind of truth there, and
Yeah.
that's religious truth. But the more dogmatic you get, the more
Yeah.
you double down on this is literally true.
Yeah.
Let me give you a really easy example for the Book of Mormon. One of the main plot points of the Book of Mormon is that there's these brothers, and the book starts out with these brothers. In fact, the first book in the Book of Mormon is called First Nephi, and Nephi is the righteous brother. Okay, well, he has a couple other brothers that are bad eggs, and one of them's called, his name is Laman, and he's the oldest brother in the family. Well, at one point in the story, a couple of the brothers, Laman and Lemuel, they just totally go off and do their own thing, and they become really bad and evil. And they become what are called the Lamanites in the Book of Mormon. And then the people who stay with Nephi become the Nephites. And these are the two main peoples described in the Book of Mormon, and they're always at odds with each other. So, Joseph Smith inherited the Protestant tradition of the Mark of Cain, that belief that people like yourself, of a darker complexion, of a darker pigmentation, inherited the curse of Cain. So he included that type of thing in the Book of Mormon. So when the Lamanites become bad, they are marked with a darker skin, and they're described as being dark and loathsome. and the Nephites retained their whiteness. How did they retain their whiteness when they grew up in Jerusalem and were obviously people who look like the Arabs of today? I don't know. I can't explain that to you. But this is the inherent racism embedded within the Book of Mormon. And that racism has no scriptural basis whatsoever. There's nothing within the Bible that can support this at all. But Joseph Smith decides to include it in the Book of Mormon. Now, remember what I said earlier. This is, to Mormons, this is the most correct book
Right.
on the planet.
Right.
Now, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has an essay on their website because the church has a like every other Christian church has racism embedded in its history.
Sure. For sure.
Mormons very famously did not allow Black people to hold the priesthood, nor did they allow Black people to participate in their temple and worship and ordinances, which for Mormons are the most important things. Those are the things you have to do in order to go back and be in the presence of God the Father again. Those things were withheld, and Black people were not allowed to participate in those things until after 1978, when they finally abolished those rules. Well, now in the church's essay, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but lots of things were preached about this specifically in the Mormon Church to justify why Black people were not allowed to have the priesthood and not allowed to participate in temple. But one of the fundamental things was the mark of Cain. Well, today the church disavows any of those beliefs. And it has an essay on its website to say, and it says specifically that the color or pigmentation of a person's skin has nothing to do with either disfavor or favor in the eyes of God. Fantastic.
Right.
We've finally, we've become progressive. We've done away with stupid, terrible, bad ideas. But now we still have the Book of Mormon.
Still there.
It's still there.
Still literally there.
In the most correct book.
Is that going to change?
It's just so difficult. And so, I actually talked to my daughter Rainbow about that. I said, the church has made it very difficult for members of the church to be able to believe the Book of Mormon anymore,
right,
because it has officially declared that it does not believe that the Lamanites, who also the church has preached for a long time, were the ancestors of the modern day Native Americans.
Oh.
So anybody who is any part of any has any kind of ancestral in any kind of Native tribe, American tribe, is an ancestor of these Lamanites. Well, of course, through DNA, we know that there's no connection between these Native Americans and Israelite people, So these are the things where it's like, it's so easy to prove the church wrong. It's so easy to sit here and say the church is so wrong, it's false, and nobody should be a part of it.
Yeah.
And that hangs on my conscience all the time.
Sure.
Because I'm still a member of this church, even though I don't really participate. Really, I show up on Sunday, but I don't really participate, and I don't want to, honestly.
Yeah.
Like it has nothing for me, but it's a community that I grew up in, so it makes me very sad.
Yeah.
To feel like I'm abandoned. It would be like abandoning America,
right?
Because America has this terrible, the Mormons were not unique in their racism.
For sure.
So, and then the question is, where do you go in the world where people don't have a history of doing horrific and terrible things?
Yeah.
So at some point at the end of the day, you have to be able to say, well, I can't abandon everything. I have to try to be a positive influence
Yeah.
and be an influence for change. And doing so without telling people what to believe, but just giving them information and allowing them to do with it what they will. So
Yeah.
that's what I was trying to do with my daughter Rainbow. And I said, you have to take this information and you have to synthesize it in your own way and decide, okay, maybe the Book of Mormon is actually a complete fiction made up by Joseph Smith,
Yeah.
but does it still teach any truth?
Right. There's the nuance.
That's the,
Right.
yeah.
That's the nuance.
And
Yeah.
that's what we have to be able to do with the Bible in general.
Yeah.
You know, okay, well, maybe the Book of John wasn't written by John. Maybe
Right.
it had 4 or 5 different authors who
Correct.
contributed to it.
Right.
But is there still some truth there that we get out of it?
Right. That's exactly. And that's why I like you say the word wrestle. It's an interesting term. This is part of it. And I always think about when I watched that documentary, The Mission, no one was trying to help this young man wrestle with different ideas. They were just enabling his fanaticism about it.
Mm.
So to say that, well, if we don't preach to these people about Jesus, they're going to go to hell. And my wife made a good point. She said, well, these people have been around for thousands of years. So all those people are in hell before he got there too.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't make any sense. Like, just like seriously think about it. Like that God would just say, excuse my language, fuck you. I'm like, you're done until
That's what he's saying,
basically it's
honestly.
like until someone comes to see you, bye girl. It's
Yeah.
like that doesn't make any sense. Actually, it actually makes no sense for a benevolent father, supervisor, whatever, to be like, you're irrelevant to me until someone that believes in me comes to see you.
There's no way that the God of the Judeo-Christian religion actually loves the whole world.
Right?
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
There's just no way that God described in the Bible loves the world. Because like you said, he doesn't give a shit about anybody living in the Pacific Islands
right.
or, for thousands and thousands of years.
Thousands and thousands of years.
China, Japan, Mongolia, the natives who lived in the Americas, for thousands of years. I mean, he just doesn't care about any of them.
Yeah. Right. That's what I'm saying. Like, this makes no sense. I'm like
because according to the Bible, he only cares about this really insignificant, tiny little nation. That's the only nation he cares about.
Right.
I mean,
and all these people are going to hell. I'm like, what? Come on, man. Like, really think about that. Like, wrestle with it. Does that make sense? Like,
even Jesus refuses to preach to anybody who's not a Jew.
Right.
And take that into perspective for a moment. Because the opening of John, says a lot of things, but one of the things it says is God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten son. Well, Jesus refuses to teach to anybody who's not a Jew. So how does he love the world by sending his only begotten son? Well, then we have the missionary work that comes after, and Paul is very important in that respect.
Right.
But even to Paul, his whole world didn't get past Mesopotamia and Spain.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
That's
like
exactly
those were
right.
the edges of his entire world.
It's a reality, yeah.
Yeah. So to say that God so loved the world, he really just loved kind of like the Mediterranean area, of the world.
Vacation.
Yeah. I mean, kudos to God. He picked a nice place, I mean,
beautiful.
Yeah. But just to your point, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't hold any water. And what I've tried to tell, my other Christian and Mormon friends and stuff like that, it's like, if that's God's plan, it's a terrible plan.
A bad plan. Yeah.
It's horrific.
Yeah.
This is a bad God. Like
Like,
this is a bad God who
damn
makes
these
bad
people to
plans.
eternal
Yeah.
damnation because no one came to see them. Like,
So
like,
this is where Mormonism actually makes a lot of sense
mm,
because Mormons believe that very literally that Jesus uh, preached to the spirits in spirit prison, in hell, and in paradise when he died, and that started what is a missionary work in the spirit world. So there's Catholics and other Christians might be more comfortable with the word purgatory,
right.
but in other words, this is interim time or space or place between mortal life on earth and being able to go to heaven. And this purgatory, and Mormons just call it the spirit world.
Yeah.
And, but during that time, work can be done, and that's a lot of the work that happens in a Mormon temple is work for the dead. Paul references baptisms for the dead. He actually asks his Christian folks, he's like, why do you baptize for the dead? And he's actually trying to make a point about the resurrection because a lot of people didn't believe in the resurrection.
Yeah.
And Paul asks him, why would you baptize for the dead if the dead don't rise? So there's no point in baptism. So there's some evidence there that this is not a uniquely Mormon thing to do, that other cultures had performed baptisms in proxy for those who had already died.
Yeah.
So Mormons really believe in that. And so Mormons believe that everyone has an opportunity to be preached to have missionary
Right.
work done for them in the spirit world, and then for people on this world to physically stand in proxy and do those ordinances for them, and thereby they can be saved.
Yeah.
So Mormons have a plan, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. I
I
actually
really
do too.
do.
It's more inclusive. I mean,
It is.
I mean, it just is. Yeah.
Yeah, and so Mormons believe in Jesus's second return, uh, or sorry, his just his second coming.
Yeah.
That will have that millennial reign, 1,000
Yeah.
years of peace on earth with Jesus reigning supreme, and during that time, all the temple work, all the stuff will be done for the dead, and we're starting it now, but it'll all be completed during that
Yeah.
time. So everybody who's ever lived on the earth will have an opportunity. And so in that way, Mormons really have a step up in presenting a God who has a coherent plan and who loves everybody. And
Right.
I really do appreciate that about Mormon
Yeah.
faith.
Yeah. It just feels more inclusive versus the um almost this individual savior messiah complex that a lot of people fall into in this fanaticism, is that they're going to save people for Christ. Really, they're just feeding their own ego, honestly, for it. I mean, there's this weird complex like, I'm doing this, look at what I did.
Yeah.
I'm going to the ends of the earth for this. Look at what I did.
Look
Like,
look how much I love God.
look how much this is very egocentric. I get that, because people do that about other stuff too. Like a bunch of other stuff in
Yeah.
life. I mean, it's pretty common
Yeah.
in life. Whatever the hustle is, it's pretty common related to that.
Yeah, unfortunately, Jesus, taught us to do the opposite. He said to,
Yeah.
like, go hide in your closet when you say your prayers and everything, because,
Right.
don't do your works before men so that you can have the
Right.
glory of men, but just do them
Right.
in your private and things like that, so that the glory is just God.
Right. And sit at the least part of the table. You don't need to sit at the head of the table. Sit at
Hmm.
the lowest seat. All these, like, be humble. But it's like you think you're being humble by doing this, but you're just actually doing the opposite of it. You're
Yeah.
like, look at what I did. Like, I did this. I went out
Yeah.
there and I went to these crazy places. I'm like, well, you didn't go to North Korea, so I don't know about that. Tell me when you go to the
Yeah.
DMZ.
Tell
We'll
me when you
talk
get
a
there.
little bit
Yeah,
different. Like,
definitely.
yeah, like, because over there, by the way, Kim Jong-un thinks he's Jesus. He literally adapt the
Yeah.
story and the manger. They literally think he's the guy.
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
wild, man. It's wild.
North Korea is a great example of just one big cult. It's a national
Yes, the
cult,
national
you
cult.
know,
Yeah.
but to a lesser extent, we have that here in the United States as well. And Donald Trump is a perfect example of that.
Right.
There are people who really honestly believe Trump is God's
Yeah.
chosen,
Right.
and so there is a cultish reverence for Donald Trump.
Right.
And no matter how many times, how many crimes he's convicted of,
Right.
he's still God's chosen. And so yeah, so anyway, I just didn't want to just be picking on North Korea when we are
Sure.
guilty of it
We're
right here
very
at
guilty
home.
of it, for sure.
How many times do you turn on a sports channel and they're having the GOAT conversation, the
Oh my
greatest of all
gosh, it's
time?
so annoying to me right
It's
now.
the
So
worst.
it's the
It's the worst.
terrible conversation to have.
I mean, who cares for one thing?
Right. This has no relevance to life. I mean,
And
like
the only
daily life.
person who might care is Michael Jordan. He seems
Right.
really invested in his
Yeah.
status as
Yeah.
GOAT. But
Sure.
I just don't see Larry Bird having that
No.
conversation. I don't see, Magic Johnson, very interested in that conversation about himself. I don't even see LeBron James really interested in
No.
that conversation, or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. They
No.
just don't seem to really care to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And so as a sports fan, why should I care?
Right.
No, and honestly, like, what would change? Even if it was objectively proven that
Right.
so and so was the greatest of all time, what would change?
It would be Wednesday. That's the difference. And then Thursday. Yeah, that's what would
Yeah.
happen.
So in my mind, the same thing can be applied to religion. So if let's just say I'm an atheist who just believes in doing good,
Yeah.
who believes in equity, who
Hmm.
believes in just treating everybody with respect, what would change if I became a Christian?
Right.
How would that uniquely make me more
Yeah.
a
Like
better?
virtuous, like
Yeah, nothing.
yeah.
Nothing about it. There's nothing so unique about the teachings of Jesus that you can't find them in any other culture being taught.
Right.
I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
it's just,
Having them actually done, that could be unique.
yeah, yeah. No,
That's the unique part,
yeah,
Simon.
that would be unique. But we have these types of teachings, and of course they're all different
Yeah.
and have their own way. But I mean, if you're really looking for like the best moral and ethical teachings, you might appeal to Buddhism
Right.
as far
Sure.
as that goes. I mean, way more moral and ethical than the Jewish and Christian teachings, in my opinion.
I
And
totally agree
so
with that. Yeah.
and those come 600 years before Jesus.
Hmm.
So Jesus isn't inventing anything, is what I'm trying to
Right.
say. He's telling us basically what we already know.
Yeah.
And that's what he spent his life doing. He's like, guys, you already know this.
Yeah.
But what you've lost is the spirit of it.
Yeah. The spirit, most
In
definitely.
fact, he tells people that he's preaching to. He says, he says, follow the teachings of the Pharisees. Jesus, for all intents and purposes, is a Pharisee.
Right.
What he's preaching against is the hypocrisy of the leaders.
Most definitely.
So it's not that they're doctrinally wrong. It's that they're not living in accordance to their own teachings.
For sure. And that has had relevance from the beginning of time. And it has tremendous relevance. It's like I was having this conversation with a client of mine, and obviously, I'm plant-based now, and this person is vegan. And I always say I'm trying to like not be hypocritical. That's like I really don't like that about myself. Like if I'm into this thing, but then I'm just completely blowing it all the time,
Yeah.
And I said I had gotten to the point with my food choices that I felt like I was just the biggest hypocrite because I had watched Food Inc. I had seen Seaspiracy. I read all these books. I know carnivores, and I was like, at some point, I am just a fraud. And
Hmm.
I have this huge compassion for these things, but I'm not willing to actually follow through with it for it. It's
Yeah.
one of the oldest things in human history.
Yeah.
Look at me here, but don't see what I do over here.
Yeah.
Like,
don't let my right hand know what my left hand's doing.
right.
That's
And
that old
Jesus was
thing.
always like the religious leaders of the time, just always so nasty, and so jealous and so vengeful. It's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Who are you? You're supposed to be a
Yeah.
religious leader. This is how you're acting. This threatens people's like their existence when you say you're talking this game, but you're not doing anything least in the least about it. Actually, that's old, right, for people.
Yeah. So I think, that's what we need to be looking to somebody like Jesus
Yeah.
for. It's not the dogma. You can argue about dogma all you want, but in so doing, you'll just prove Jesus right. That you're so caught up in the dogma that you've lost the spirit of it. You've lost what it was pointing to. So if you can let go of the dogma, and Paul, he really, in my opinion, really failed at this.
Yeah, I
And it's
agree.
and it's not, yeah, and it's not that he wasn't well intentioned, but Paul got so caught up in the new dogma of Christianity that I think he lost a lot of the spirit of it, the
Yeah.
spirit of what Jesus was trying to convey. And I'm not saying that is 100% true. I'm just saying that I think generally in a lot of his epistles, I think they bear that out.
Yeah.
That he was caught up in dogmatic preaching,
Yeah.
but I also think that he was also trying to get other people to not be so caught up in dogmatic
Yeah.
teaching. So
Yeah.
he's a complicated guy,
That's
and
right.
and I'm not trying to pigeonhole him in one thing or another. I'm just saying that he's complicated. Christianity is very complicated. It has been from the start. There's never been a unified Christianity.
No.
There's been many attempts to unify Christianity over the time. That's why we have these different creeds and things like
Yeah.
that. So there's these attempts to unify Christianity, but ultimately they've all failed.
Yes.
And Christianity is just not a unified front in any respect.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, and part of that reason is just there's too much dogma. There's too many of, and this sounds kind of, but like knowing the signs and signals of every separate thing or the
Mm-hmm.
inter traditions of every separate thing is gotten away from the spirit of those things. I just actually think that's a genius thing you said. It's like almost kind of like let go of the dogma and just embrace the spirit of the teachings. Then you would actually start to come in alignment. There'd be an
Yeah.
alignment. There's a lack of alignment, in my opinion. Yeah.
And then you would see that most every other religious tradition is has the same goal.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
you know
Yeah.
and I've brought this up many times before, like a lot of my Christian friends like to pretend that the world had no law before the law of Moses.
Are they
you know
Trumpers? I
that
mean,
Yeah. I mean, there in Louisiana, the
yeah,
governor, he
there you go.
actually
Yeah.
said that, we got to put the Ten Commandments back
Right.
up because, and for one thing, you have to also ask which Ten Commandments. And
Exactly right. That's exactly
yeah,
right.
all
Yeah.
of us know what
We
we're
know the
referring to
difference.
when we
Come
say
on.
the Ten
Yeah.
Commandments, but there aren't just one Ten Commandments in the
Agreed.
scriptures.
Exactly.
And the law of Moses is actually comprised of like what 613
Yeah.
different laws.
Yeah.
So are you going to put all those up in the classroom? I mean,
Big classroom, man.
yeah. But one of the things he said when he was signing that bill or whatever
Yeah.
was that if we're going to be a people of law and order, then we have to appeal to the original lawgiver. And I was like, not even by 1,000 years is he the original lawgiver. And if you really break down the law of Moses and you compare it to the Code of Hammurabi, which
Mhm.
was the Babylonian law that 300 or so years before the
Yeah.
law of Moses, then there's just too many similarities to ignore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I'm not saying that that the law of Moses was a copy of the Code of Hammurabi, but it was at least influenced by.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of like the United States. We didn't copy Greek democracy, but we were very influenced by
Right.
ancient Greek democracy.
For sure.
And you just can't deny these connections. And our forefathers, the founders of our nation, didn't try to deny those connections. They
Yeah,
embraced those
exactly.
connections. They said these are our influences. That's the difference between the law of Moses
Yeah.
and the Constitution of the United States, is that the law of Moses doesn't embrace that it's being that it wants to present itself as direct revelation from God when
Yeah.
it's obviously very influenced by previous codes of law
Yeah.
that are hundreds of years older,
Yeah.
and we have writings and teachings from ancient Egypt that are at least 1,000 years older than the law
Yeah.
of
Of
Moses. I
course.
mean, the ego that you were talking about,
Yeah. It's too much ego. Yeah.
that's all it boils down to, is that we want, as followers of the Judeo-Christian tradition, we want our God to be the first and the most unique,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. When it just, the moment you look into it, it blows up in your face with the first Google search you do.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just,
Like, well, I see this here. It's so much
yeah.
ego. It's just a very built-in thing with humans. Just a lot of ego to be number one, to be the righteous one, the most righteous, the most correct. The biggest. This is Trump. The biggest is the best thing ever that's happened.
Yeah.
It's like all ridiculous vocabulary. I'm like, okay,
America first,
America
Christianity
first.
first,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, make America great again. Oh, that's
Yeah.
original. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like it's like, man, I'm glad you're biting off everything from the past. Like,
Yeah.
oh, we're the first peoples here. We discovered this place. No, those people here living here for thousands of years.
Yeah.
It's like,
If you want to make America great again, then we just like get rid of all the white people who came over here in the first place. You know what I'm saying?
I'm just, it's like, this is just, everyone's just like, it's just so ego. And I think I was telling my wife before we wrap up here, I was like, this is one of the things I like about psychedelics so much, is that when done like a heroic dose, and you're dissolving of the ego, you start seeing yourself very differently outside of your ego. You're very much
Mm,
controlled by this egomaniacal behavior. Most humans are. It's
yeah,
so deeply entrenched in this ego. Even the best people struggle with their ego so much. It makes you do great things, but also
I
it
do.
just, yeah, I mean, we all do. And it's interesting not having it. And I've had that experience, and it changed everything about how I saw myself. I was like,
Mm.
"Oh, I see. It's very peaceful without this." It's actually really peaceful. I'm not caught up in this war with myself about my my thirstiness, my desire to be acknowledged all the time. Whatever it is inside of all people just disappears. Yeah.
In Jesus's teachings of abandoning hypocrisy,
Yeah.
like you're saying, he says, come follow me, my the take my yoke upon you,
And
because the
yeah,
burden is
it's
light.
light. Yeah.
So, yeah, it might be difficult to really follow the teachings of Jesus, but in those moments when you do, when we allow ourselves to abandon hypocrisy and stop thinking so highly of ourselves and stop worrying about what other people think of us,
Yeah.
like you're saying, it is so peaceful.
It's peaceful.
It is so peaceful to shred dogma,
Yeah.
to toss it in the trash, and to just say, how can I best serve the person I'm with in accordance to their specific needs, not according to a dogma,
Yeah.
not according to some writing from almost 4,000 years ago, but according to the moment that we're in now. How can I be of the best service to that person? How can I love them in the best
Yeah.
way? And Jesus is teaching, I mean, you find that taught time
Oh,
and time again in his parables and his
yeah.
teachings. Just let go of the dogma and let go of your cultural and religious bias and just be a good neighbor.
Yeah. It's totally true. You always inspire me, Simon. You literally, I always tell my wife, I always say this all the time. I said, Simon has inspired my faith in so many ways because you've inspired me to look much deeper into it and to free myself from, and honestly, I didn't say dogma, but to free myself from all the noise
Mm,
of faith. I feel like it's just a lot of noise. But when you get down to the beauty of it, I think that's what you do the best. You're good
mm,
at breaking down the barriers of religion and faith and centering it on the spirit of it. And that's what you
mm.
teach your kids. That's what you told, Rainbow and all. And it's like, and that's what you've taught me. The same thing. And I have more faith today than I've ever had in my life. But it's a different
Mm.
faith. It's a different type of faith. It's not the faith that I grew up with. It's the faith I have as an adult that gets rid of all the BS and stands on that spirit and those teachings. That's the best faith I think I could have.
I love that so much. Thank you so much for saying
Mhm.
that. There's so many things, and I know we're out of time, but there's so many things I want to say about that, and we'll just save it for another time.
Yeah.
But, in that book that I'm writing, I have a chapter, and I've told you about it, Jesus the Bastard.
Yeah. Love that.
One of the big points of that chapter is that Jesus is breaking boundaries. He's just like, take down the boundaries between us, and between you and I, there should be so many boundaries.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense? It's like
Sure.
racial boundaries, religious background boundaries, just whatever
Yeah.
you want to throw in there. But there's no boundary between you and I.
No.
We just appreciate each other. We appreciate what each other brings to the table. I'm inspired by you. I look
Thank you.
forward to our conversation so much because I know that I'm going to be talking to somebody who's just really thinking about it
Yeah.
and really wanting to do, has the same goal. We're living completely different lives, but we
Yeah.
have the same goal of getting rid of hypocrisy in
Yes.
ourselves and
Yeah.
being a better neighbor to other people
Yeah.
by doing so. And I think, if we could just all have that ideal within us, we wouldn't care about dogma at all.
No, I totally agree. Yeah. And in many ways, it's freed me in that sense. And that I'm forever grateful for that. And I see it like when I talk to my wife, I see it turning in her mind. Like
Mm,
she's like, I'm struggling with some of this. I was like, that's good. That's good. It doesn't mean it has to tank your faith. That's not what in fact, for me, it's leveled it up. It's like I went to the next level because I saw it for the way it is and how it and the spirit of it. If I just show up and be nice and I'm a good person and I help people and I love them and I give them grace, I am all of a sudden I have alignment. I've
mm,
created alignment. When they say that I care about animals and all this stuff and I all these things, and now I align my nutritional practices, I have alignment. I start caring actually about the animals of the kingdom and and all the
yeah.
wonderful things. That's all I want is alignment. I want to kill the hypocrisy in me. That's my whole thing because I know it'll
Killing
bring me closer. I want to kill it.
killing hypocrisy feeds love.
Yeah,
It really does. It's just like this needle that
yeah,
like hypocrisy's on this side and love's on the other side. And the less hypocrisy you have, the more you're filling that space
yep,
up with love.
that's right, man. Amazing, great way to end that, Simon. You're the man. I look forward to the next time we speak all the time, man.
Yeah.
This is
Maybe next
just
time we'll
fun.
talk about movies.
I don't know, man. I feel like we barely talk about movies anymore. We're
I
always into
know.
this,
I
but
know.
it's
We had a plan for today. We didn't even
you
we didn't
know.
even touch it.
I
But
watched
that's
some bad '80s movies. I have to tell you as well.
yeah. But that's the great part of our conversations
Yeah,
is that, you know, I don't want these conversations to become stale,
yeah,
and so I want us to keep moving and pressing
yeah.
forward. But I don't feel like they ever do. I feel
No, it
like
never.
every
It's
time
always
we sit
relevant.
down, we've always got, you're always bringing something to
Yeah,
the table, and it just gets us going on
yeah.
these
I'm always watching
conversations.
stuff, just like
Yeah.
you. We're always watching TV or something, and it reminds us of these conversations type of thing. But thank you so much, Simon. Appreciate you, man.
All right, man.
Gotta run. Gotta get
Thanks.
done.
Love
All
you,
right,
buddy.
man.